Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Coach and Benway podcast. I'm Coach Redpill, joined as always by my co-host, Dr. Benway. And today we're going to be talking about why liberalism failed, a very interesting book that has come out and has caused quite a splash in our neck of the woods. And in general, it's been a very successful book. This is going to be the first of a two-parter because in this first episode, we're going to be discussing the book itself. And in the second episode, we're going to have an interview with its author, Professor Patrick Deneen of the University of Notre Dame. So, in this episode, we're going to be discussing the book. And Professor Deneen in this book is, Benway, why don't you give us the preface of the book? Because I think that you're better at that than I am.
Sure. I think the book is a fairly straightforward critique in a traditional philosophical sense of liberalism. The title itself, Why Liberalism Failed. It's less than 200 pages long of actual content. And in a pretty straightforward way, it says, look, liberalism failed because it succeeded. The very definition of what liberalism hopes to achieve, the liberation of the individual desires, if you will, yep. From any kind of impediment, be they cultural, authoritative, what have you, is a goal that's in some sense achieved, but it's achieved by creating a lot of the mechanisms that we would say are intrinsically statist or authoritarian. And his whole point is, look, liberalism demands that you ultimately create these bureaucratic and semi-aristocratic and authoritarian and decultured structures in order to enable your individual desires to be fulfilled. In other words, to allow you to be a better consumer, which is really what liberalism ultimately gets to. You built all of these apparatuses of power that we live in. The challenge is there's a lot of discontents with that, and the discontents should be understood not as, oh, liberalism got it wrong, we should tweak it and make it better liberalism. It's like, no, liberalism did what it said it was going to do.
Yeah, it's the causes of it.
This is what you get. It's succeeded, but it failed to give you what you think you ultimately needed. Now what do you do?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, the book is, from my concern, I don't think the book does a lot of new ground tracing. I think this is a lot of arguments that have existed for a long time. I think it's a good preface of it. I think it's a good light intro. Certainly not the lightest book to read. I think you have to pay attention to it. But I think it's worth the effort, and I think it's a good summary for a lot of folks who may not necessarily be super deep into the history and philosophy of everything, but you're going to get a nice precise history of a lot of stuff that's been talked about for, I'd say, at least 200 years.
Yeah.
And it's a very good intro.
Yeah, because one thing I have to note, and because we're talking about liberalism and casual and we're throwing it around, but we're not talking about political liberalism, which is really progressive liberalism. We are talking about the ideology of liberalism that started with Hobbes and Locke, and the notion that liberty is the pursuit of your own happiness, the pursuit of your own desires and wants above all else. Because as the book, like you say, it's a great preface that sort of like summarizes a whole host of other critiques from Marxism to distributism. I mean, it just brings it into one neat and very tidy package, all of the critiques of our current society. And what's interesting to me is that, see, this book is explaining why we have people on the political left who are turning more and more towards socialism and towards the discredited ideology of communism. And whereas on the right, you have more and more people turning towards authoritarianism, if not fascism, which has also been an ideology that liberalism superseded and defeated. Because the liberalism, the regime that we are currently living in, is an ideology in the sense that it views human beings in a way that is not necessarily true. Hang on, I have a few lines here that I want to read from the book itself that I think, pretty much captures it. And if you'll indulge me, it's from the introduction. Liberalism has failed, not because it fell short, but because it was true to itself. It has failed because it has succeeded. As liberalism has, quote, become more fully itself, end quote, as its inner logic has become more evident and its self-contradictions manifest, it has generated pathologies that are at once deformations of its claims, yet realizations of liberal ideology. A political philosophy that was launched to foster greater equity, defend a pluralist tapestry of different cultures and beliefs, protect human dignity, and, of course, expand liberty, in practice generates titanic inequality, enforces uniformity and homogeneity, fosters material and spiritual degradation, and undermines freedom. Its success can be measured by its achievements of the opposite of what we have believed it would achieve. Rather than seeing the accumulating catastrophe as evidence of our failure to live up to liberalism's ideals, we need rather to see clearly that the ruins it has produced are the signs of its very success. That quote pretty much captures the book.
It's pretty much it's the you have 200 pages of exegesis on that statement, or a few statements there, but essentially those few statements are the book. You really don't need more than that.
Yeah.
What we should folks should realize when they're reading this book is that it's fundamentally operating on the level of dialectics. By that, it's within the Marxist tradition, which is generally oversimplified to say, well, you have a thesis and an antithesis to that thesis, and then you unify them into synthesis. What the really way to understand that is to say, look, within the object you are critiquing or the subject you're discussing, it will have stated goals, but as you examine that, the reality of those goals into practice, but even within the logic of those goals, are contradictions, challenges, and complications to its own thinking, meaning that what you get as a result is something that simultaneously does what the project's meant to achieve, but also does not realize that effect on the level that you think it would. It's not like a straightforward, like, oh, liberty means we're more free. Well, what you mean by more freedom in terms of the liberty, liberalism, defined historically means, well, there's more centralized authority, there's more regulation of the personal and the private life, and you, in some sense, have no real culture other than this generic non-culture.
Yeah.
So that's what he's doing, essentially. And that's why I said this book is, in some sense within the Marxist tradition. He's not a Marxist. I think he's very clear he thinks that's project's doomed to failure. But that way of thinking about liberalism, that it fails through its own successes, and it can't achieve the emancipation that it professes to achieve, is part of the challenge. That's why Marxists made the arguments that they did.
Yeah, I actually would not be surprised if it turned out that Patrick Deneen, the author of this book, was a Marxist in his youth.
He was. I think he did say that. I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was.
Okay, but be that as it may, his what's good about this book is that it puts under one roof a whole panoply of ideas that you start to realize that our neck of the woods of the YouTube interwebs, right, fits very neatly within this category, because he's saying that because liberalism is sort of like a victim of its own success, what's happening is that on the one hand you're having the state trying to impose control over every little facet of your life, and on the other hand, the individual being allowed to do whatever idiocy they might happen to want. For instance, transsexuality, which we all agree is just craziness, right? And it's sort of like saying this is the end state. And what's interesting is that it all circles back to the famous thought experiment of the Leviathan. Thomas Hobbes famously, the famous thought experiment that there was just the individual and the state. And we have reached that end state. And it's really interesting because in 7 chapters, Deneen basically breaks down liberalism in all its contingent parts. I'll just read the titles of the chapters and you'll get the idea. Chapter 1 is Unsustainable Liberalism. There it goes. Number 2, Uniting Individualism and Statism. where he posits basically that the left and the right, though they superficially appear to be different, they are actually the same thing because they are both trying to shore up the individual and the state, the individual isolated from place and time and culture, and the state that is all-encompassing and that controls every facet of your life. Then chapter 3 is liberalism as anti-culture, where he talks about how the liberalist state, or liberalism rather, has taken what was properly culture and created an ersatz version, a consumeristic version of it that seems to be like the real thing, but isn't. It's just signifiers of the thing. And he posited something very amusing in that chapter was the issue of how national holidays are shopping days, and shopping days like Black Friday are national holidays, which is just bizarre, but totally true. Then chapter 4, technology and the loss of liberty, which is about the liberal anxiety over technology, over, on the one hand, loving it, and on the other hand, fearing it tremendously. Chapter 5, liberalism against liberal arts, self-stating. Chapter 6 is the new aristocracy, which you and I, Benway, have discussed at some length. And that was the chapter that really, when I started reading this book, I sort of like flipped around through it. And that was the first chapter I actually read because it talks about our class so fucking well. Didn't you agree?
Yeah, it captures it, yeah. It's pretty much what I had said on a couple of previous podcasts.
Yeah. And this, I have to admit, I'm a huge fanboy of the book. A huge fan because it helps to understand why we're in the place that we are now, and a lot of why we in the internet are talking about the things that we're talking about. And on the one hand, we are expressing dissatisfaction, and on the other hand, the state is trying to repress us. I love it.
Well, let's talk about the central image of this book, which I think is key that you need to understand his thinking. And that is, you rightly point out that the Hobbes's Leviathan is a key central text for him. So basically, for those who are unaffiliated, or not unaffiliated, unfamiliar with the Leviathan, the premise goes like this. Look, the Leviathan is a book about political origins of politics in some regards. The Leviathan states this: look, in the natural order of things, man in his state of nature is devoid of all context. He is an individual alone in a chaotic world. There is no higher authority he can call to for support. Life is nasty, brutish, and short. What individuals do to get themselves out of said context is to, in some sense, contract amongst themselves or conspire amongst themselves to create a bureaucratic or an authoritative structure, a sovereign ultimately, which carries them through society. It's a mediating factor to everything. Now, the reason I point that out is that is a governing text of liberalism. There is no liberal who will pretend otherwise. I mean, yeah, Locke will be their favorite text, but Hobbes kind of laid it out first, and they still think in Hobbesian terms. But here's Deneen's point, and he articulates it through evidence, through a lot of the key documents of liberalism. That whole notion of the Hobbesian state of nature is an abstraction from reality.
Yeah.
There never was, or nowhere you can point to, a state of nature like that.
No.
Not the least of which is that man, as the Greeks would have understood, is a social being.
Yeah.
You are always in the context of a family, a culture of those around you. What effectively Hobbes was doing, and what liberals were doing, is an active effort to abstract the individual away from those important contexts, those cultural, familial, local community contexts, which necessitated order in society to begin with. I mean, culture is in some regards the received working through of the knowledge of all of your forebears.
Yeah.
What effectively was happening there is they're saying, look, you as the individual, you're the important piece. All that other shit is arbitrary bullshit. They took an active effort to get rid of that.
Yeah.
That's all of those chapters he's going through are the exercises from the beginning of the liberal project through today on how all of those realities that predate the individual, how that society tries to break them down and get rid of them, because it conceives of the world as individual based. And guess what? it doesn't start like that, but they're going to make the world as if it was.
Yeah.
And so that's why, oh, your family, arbitrary, capricious rules. Why would you ever be bound by that? Culture, what the hell? These, learn to think for yourself. You're an individual.
Yeah.
Oh, they're destroying all those things. And what happens when you're that individual lost alone in this artificially imposed state of nature? What's left for you? Well, what's left for you is to assume that the centralized authority of the state or the market or this generic non-culture, in other words, multiculturalism, which I think Deneen is right to put is as anti-culture or a culture. It's the destruction of culture into generic mass. Yeah. Well, you throw everything, all of your hopes and dreams for order and authority into those central organizations or non-cultures, and it has the power to dictate everything. But its goal is to say, well, the fulfillment of individual desires is what we will achieve. In other words, you become the ultimate consumer.
Yeah.
And it's different. He brings up a good point that this liberalism is also almost like a magpie stealing an old notion of what liberty was. In the Greek and Christian tradition, liberty was best understood as, for lack of a better term, self-discipline.
Yeah.
You would not, it realizes that when you are a slave, when you are bound to your desires, your base desires, you are in some sense a slave to them. Mm-hmm. You are dictated by the whims of, oh, I want to have sex with this right now. I want to buy this right now. I need to engorge myself on these other things. No, what defines your freedom is your ability to control yourself, your ability to master these desires for you. And liberalism, ironically, just switches that about and says, no, liberalism is the fulfillment of those desires. The notion to bound them is just arbitrary and capricious. And this is kind of like I know I went into a lot of detail on this, but it's the central metaphor that's kind of guiding Deneen's thinking.
Well, what's interesting, he quotes a critic of liberalism. I can't find the page right now, but the criticism of Hobbes and Locke as well is that they say it's an idea of lonely, childless men who have forgotten their childhoods. And it's absolutely right. The notion that you are divorced from other people, the place that you are grown in, that you are born in, or the times that you are living in, that you are divorced from them, and that you're just an individual, that just floating free. Like I've said in that central metaphor, the lonely balloon floating alone across a clear blue sky. That's the central conceit of liberalism. And that central conceit, how can I put this? It is an ideology that was imposed. We just don't realize it. Because we look at fascism and especially communism. Communism is easier in this case to see as an ideology that was imposed on people. And like he says, most ideologies fail for two reasons. Number one, they fail to account for the true sense of human beings, and number two, that failure to account for what human beings truly are leads inevitably to its collapse because of its inability to satisfy those basic human needs. Now, it seems to me that liberalism was very successful because one of the great needs that people had was material well-being. And since it was so good at providing material well-being, it's been an ideology that has lasted longer. Were it not for its ability to materially provide, it would have been discarded long ago. But it's the shape of it, of all people being fungible, of its endless pursuit of markets, and its pursuit of markets that foment production, that foment industrialization, technology and all the rest of it. And that has led to material prosperity that has been, in a very real sense, the anesthesia for what has been done to the human soul by liberalism. But the damage has been done to the human soul, even with all the material benefits that we've accrued. And I think that what's happened as of late is that we've reached sort of like the end stages of material well-being. And now we're realizing that this thing, it was great for the period, between the 15th century and the 20th century. But now we're starting to see the things that we lack. because of liberalism. And liberalism is, in a sense, fighting back against this critique, fighting back against the people who want to, who are striving for something more. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it does. In fact, it brings to mind, and I have no doubt that Deneen probably subconsciously was aware of this. Thomas Kuhn's theory on the scientific revolution, or not on the scientific revolution, but on scientific revolution such.
I forgot it.
Yeah. So basically, his idea is like, look, structures of thought, theories of, in his case, it was usually within the realm of science. The Copernican model, the Galilean models of the movement of the planets, or even Newtonian physics. Basically, what happens, you construct a law of physics, or anything that kind of governs your notions of reality, and it succeeds the degree to which it solves problems you're trying to figure out. Revolution happens over time because pieces of the predictive power of the model, or the kind of goal-seeking power of the model, increasingly frays at the edge and starts to fail. You notice that it's not sufficiently explaining something, or it's not getting to the goal you had in mind. Eventually, it accumulates so much that it necessitates a revolution in thought. And you say, okay, Newtonian physics can't explain everything. We got to come up with a new fucking model. You get Einsteinian physics as a result.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially happening with liberalism. It happened faster with communism because it reached that accelerated point during the 70s and 80s.
Yeah.
Liberalism is reaching that point now, not the least of which is because, to your point, yes, we're in the Western countries have achieved significant accumulation of wealth and prosperity, but there is increasing anxiety over the long-term potential of that, the notion of what else has been sacrificed in order to achieve this, fraying at the edges, right? The ability to achieve all of the goals you want, it's becoming increasingly unsatisfying. Take, your way of life is continually, consumed in the maw of progress, right? Once confronted with that, you then realize that, like, hey, this isn't doing everything I had hoped it was supposed to be doing. There's big holes in here, whether we could articulate it or not. And it feels to me like we're approaching that point where you're at the precipice of revolution, one way or another. I don't necessarily mean violent revolution, although that could conceivably happen, but certainly a revolution in the thinking on what do we really need to organize this by. And liberalism's response to it, to your point, is in some sense becomes more centralized and aggressive.
Yeah, that because we're seeing that in the stamping out of dissenting voices that are, if you think about it, they're sort of like marginally dissenting voices. For example, Andrew Anglin and Alex Jones, who have been stamped out, the Daily Stormer and InfoWars. I'm not categorizing in the same class of thinking. They're quite different, as anybody who even knows in passing sense knows. But rather that they were both stamped out because there's a sense that they are undermining liberalism, and that encroachment on people who are critical of the liberal paradigm. They're going to be increasingly stamped out, and it's going to become more and more repressive. We're seeing that on the one hand, and yet on the other hand, we're seeing that more and more people are becoming dissatisfied, and it is sort of like going to become a self-reinforcing cycle, a very, very black downward trajectory of negative feedback, where there's more repression, and because of the more repression, more dissatisfaction, which requires more repression.
What's interesting, though, what's interesting about it is that I think most people, when they read this book, may not fully grasp the level of critique they're dealing with. It's funny you had mentioned, well, Anglin's a special case, but
Alex Jones.
In Alex Jones,
Mm-hmm.
in the way this book conceives of it, I would argue that Alex is still a liberal.
Yeah.
Alec is still a liberal in the traditional sense that Deneen is using the word, because Deneen brings up a good point, which I think folks on our side would do well to listen to, especially the liberalists.
Mm-hmm.
He makes it very clear that this distinction, what we think of as like the right and left wing political divide is really just the divide between classical liberalism and progressive liberalism. Their main difference is, whether the market or the state controls more say in how the society governs. The reality is they're both more or less they're both more or less the same. They don't achieve their specific ends of the one limiting government or the other limiting market. They both are fundamentally acting in agreement upon core principles that lead to the acceleration of bureaucratic power, cultural consumption and genericization, and market expansion into humans as consumers. There's little disagreement on that. What I think the liberal order is dealing with is that even critiques from within the liberals seem to emphasize how frayed the system is. And so you're so sensitive about things looking so weak that you'll just fight off whatever criticism comes about, even if it's from within. Because the reality you're going to have to confront when you read this book, and I think 9 out of 10 people who listen here may not want to agree with this, this is a fundamental critique, not just of liberalism today. It's a critique in very direct ways of the American project as such.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And the fact of the matter is, I think that it's an astoundingly accurate critique of the American project. Because, like, for instance, one of the things it talks about in the chapter on anti-culture, let me just flip through it while I'm speaking. He's talking about how people feel the culture that exists today is not really a culture; it's an anti-culture in the sense that it's sort of like he has like some great. Here, let me quote it from it. What is popularly called a culture, often modified by an adjective, for instance, pop culture or media culture or multiculturalism, is in fact a sign of the evisceration of culture as a set of generational customs, practices, and rituals that are grounded in local and particular settings. The only forms of shared cultural liturgy, quote unquote, that remain are celebrations of the liberal state and the liberal market. National holidays have become occasions for shopping, and shopping holy days, such as Black Friday, have become national holidays. That pretty much is it. And he goes on to talk about how there are 3 cornerstones of human experience: nature, time, and place, that form the basis of culture. And liberalism's success is premised upon their uprooting and replacement with facsimiles that bear the same names.
Now, right. We can go through each of those 3 very quickly. Nature, place, and time. Nature, the very notion, like, hey, there is an innate thing that, like, there's what makes man, woman, the laws of order. It's like, well, no, not in liberalism as we see it now. Those can be, even if those are social constructs that can be broken down. Even the notion of I was born a man, but really I'm going to be a woman. We can engineer that for you. You've conquered nature. Place. Think about it.
Okay, go ahead. Please continue.
Place. The notion that, hey, I was born a Chicagoan, right? And this is my people, my culture and everything. Oh, no, especially when you're in art class, you move about wherever the money is. It's like, it's all the fucking same shit. Even this whole notion of...
It becomes the same thing.
It becomes the same thing. And even when we think of, we're celebrating multiculturalism, but we joke about the plenty of restaurants you have. Well, if you think about it, if all of the culture, let's say all of the Chinese culture has now been reduced to egg foo young and noodles, then there's not much culture there. It's just a product you can buy.
Yeah, consumption.
And time is probably the worst. Time, because this is the fundamental truth of all of those other things. Culture is, as I've said before on this podcast, the accumulation of earlier generations' learned attempts to figure out either what's best in life or how to navigate the world. And yes, they have lessons that they learned and they're passing down, and you probably do evolve them, but you're gathering from them. Liberalism is, no, this is progress. The world belongs to the living. You decide. It's up to you. And we're always, you're always living in the present, and the future is just an undiscovered country. You've completed the disassociation on all 3 levels. In the Heideggerian sense, this is part of why he says man is in a state of thrownness. You are, in some sense, thrown outside of all context into whatever precarious situation you might be in. And in liberalism case, that precarious situation is uncertainty in who you are, where you are, and in what place in history you have.
Yeah, exactly. It's an ending now with no sense of continuity from the past or into the future. And because of this lack of continuity, I would argue that that is the reason that familial bonds between parents and children are so weak, because there's no conception that they come from a past and they will continue on into a future. It's just, I have produced more consumers and they will go and consume. And that's why, of course, there's so many women who forego having children, because why would you? It's not an economically rational decision. And that's the thing. Liberalism is creating the conditions whereby the people are no longer. I want to get back to the cultural thing, because it was very important to me. But just to go on the side note, it's liberalism is the reason that we are not procreating. We're not procreating. We're not having children because we don't see a reason for it. Because children, in a very real sense, are just a burden. I mean, I have a couple of small children. They're just a burden, I mean, like on a financial level, on a liberal level, insofar as this ideological structure that we are living in, they are nothing but a burden. But of course, there's more to life than the selfish pursuit of happiness. There are other values that are greater. And of course, that's the reason why you have children, why I at least have children, right? And of course, on the one hand, materially speaking, they are a burden. On another higher plane, they are a great asset. They are one of the most important, frankly, they are the most important thing in my life. And they are the reason that I do everything that I do in my life. But liberalism negates that. And so in a very real sense, it's an ideology that will cause the destruction of the very people who believe in it. Okay, well, I'm gone off the.
Well, yeah. So it's because we operate under the utilitarian theory.
Yeah.
Right, which is maximizing pleasure, the maximum amount of pleasure across a population. Yes, of course, if you think about your utility, yes, there's a period of time when children have very low utility for the parents, if not negative utility.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'll never get out of that. And liberalism's attitude is, frankly, as of right now, it doesn't really have an answer to it. I think if you were to historically ask Madison or Hamilton whether they should have children or there should be children made, I don't think they would say, no, there shouldn't be no children. They're not worth it. But the truth of the matter is that the logic of liberalism kind of leads you to question the need for it, frankly. That's just kind of where you end up. And that's the whole point of this book.
Yeah,
right?
Well, to go back, you're exactly right. But to go back a little bit to this book, the anti-culture aspect of it struck me. It had a very big impact of it, because one of the things that I've noticed, I like the fact that it was organized so neatly, disparate events that I had perceived, that I just could not find a way to articulate them. Okay. Look, I realize that most of this book is just rehashing of others' critiques of liberalism, but its tidiness, it's putting it all in neat spaces that create a very clear critique of it, is what I find impressive about the book. Because I am not diminishing Professor Deneen in any way, but I'm saying that I don't think much of this book is particularly original. But that's not the beauty of the book. The beauty of the book is that it puts it all under one roof in a very easy to understand package. That's why I'm unsurprised that the book is as successful as it has been, and why people are reading it and should read it, quite frankly, because it's just putting everything neatly. Now, that's a rare thing, that ability to encompass a lot of complex ideas into one tidy package that makes complete sense it's a rare thing. It's a craft that frankly we don't give enough credit for. We think, oh, it's easy. It's incredibly hard. But anyway, the thing about anti-culture that I found interesting was this section called parasitic liberalism, where he writes, "We are more likely to consume prepackaged, market-tested, mass-marketed consumables, often branded in commercialized symbolism that masks that masks that culture's evisceration." Um, that was a really interesting line because it reminded me of Halloween stuff, the Halloween candies. I was thinking specifically of those plastic pumpkin bags that children carry to put in all their sweets, right? That you see in supermarkets and Walmarts and what have you. And you see it everywhere around the world, by the way. The Halloween, which is a typical, I do believe it's a New England celebration, has...
Well, it's just All Hallows Eve, which is the night before
Yeah.
All Saints Day.
Exactly. And so what's happened is that celebration of children going around looking for candy in the neighborhood that they live in, it's gone global. And we sell these products, and it is completely divorced from what it originated from. And even as it has the patina of quote unquote culture, but it's not culture. It's just
I'm surprised you didn't mention Christmas. Christmas, I think, is the best example of that. I mean, Christmas is fundamentally a core piece of the religious holiday. Easter too.
Yeah.
Christmas is now
bunny.
Christmas is now a fat man going down your chimney, and Easter is a fucking bunny.
Yeah, and Easter is the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we talk about an Easter bunny.
Yeah.
I mean, who could have believed this? If you'd said this to somebody in the 19th century, let alone the 15th or 12th century, people would have been outraged. They couldn't have believed it. And here now we're very la-di-da about the Easter bunny, you know?
This is what I think to me was the best piece of the book. A piece I've already known, to your point. Yeah, I don't think it was original, but I don't think it was intended to be. I think it was just intended to articulate it.
Yeah.
The big lesson I would say people should get out of this book is the degree to which liberalism is actually an active destroying mechanism.
Yes.
He has a great story he told about, because the Amish come in regularly in at least one chapter in this book, and he uses them as examples of, look, you can say what you want about the Amish culture, but it is an active attempt for them to go through all of the pieces of the modern world and say, we're going to reject this, that, or the other because it would undermine the notion of community. The great example he gives is they don't have insurance policies in the Amish, because when they looked at what the insurance policy fundamentally is, it says it's an anonymized pooling of resources, of which, hey, like people situated similarly to me, pool our money in, and if something happens to one of us, we just extract the money to pay it off for others. Their notion was that, look, that's too abstracted. Our insurance policy, quote unquote, in the Amish community is the community itself. If something happens to one of our own, we take care of them.
Right.
And we know who they are. And he brings that up, and then he says, but here's the chilling story he had brought up. When he talked about Rumspringa, which is that period of time when the member of the community has a year to basically live in the modern world, and they decide whether or not to come back. He says, look, it's like a 90+ success rate of people deciding to come back and stay with the community for a time immemorial. And when he was telling his students at Princeton their response was, they're clearly not, operating under slave mentality. We need to go in. Basically, we need to go in there and change their mind and rescue them or undermine it. Yeah. And he says it was chilling because fundamentally liberalism cannot conceive of anything that doesn't accept the foundation of liberalism. And that's fundamentally what is happening to culture as such. Liberalism refuses to allow actual culture to exist because it's fundamentally, does not believe that that's just culture. Any kind of culturally received norms are inherently suspect because, it's that ex nihilo stupid identity bullshit, which is, I should be able to decide what rules apply to me versus not.
Yeah.
Right. And the joke ultimately is that kind of individualist thinking means that the arbitrator becomes a centralized authority. Yeah. It's just basically you still have the authoritarianism. It's just abstracted from any kind of people you can identify with, right?
Yeah.
To change it or modify it or participate in it. That's the joke. I mean, it is actively trying to destroy everything around it.
Yeah.
for the sake of itself. The best, I mean, I'll use pop culture because fuck it, because that's the nature of liberalism. It's the only way you understand it anyway. It's the Borg
Yeah.
in Star Trek.
Yeah. It's the Borg. It cannot conceive of somebody who does not want to be the Borg, and it just invades
It
everything.
assimilates. It assimilates. Everything becomes raw material, and then you're all become part of this, collective, collective of genericized, automatons. Thraldom is the word he uses a lot. He being Deneen in this book. Thrall. It's a thrall is almost like a zombie.
Yeah.
It's just this creature that just moves within the group in just a generic lurching towards things that are, in some sense outside of its control. And there are ways in which it manifests all over the place. He talks about politics being a spectator sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not like in the old days when, politics was you're actually out in your fucking town hall or your town square and you're working as a community to resolve the fucking issues that matter to your community. Now it's, the red team or the blue team, honey, who's winning now? Oh, you get to watch it on TV. You get to see this, that, or the other. But the reality is that under most circumstances, you don't really get to decide who's the real fucking candidate that represents you. And even if you did, it's abstracted away. It's just shit happening on the TV.
Yeah, exactly.
There's that. The other way it happens is the notion of technology, right? And he says it's not even just that there's technology and we rely on it. It's this whole notion that technological advancement cannot be stopped. It moves under its own accord. We're just pulled along with it. In other words, you give up any responsibility you have, and just the notion that technology is just going to advance. What can you do? And I've heard that many fucking times from our crowd. It's just a tacit acceptance of everything.
Yeah.
Again, it's like a spectator sport.
Yeah, exactly. And the tacit acceptance that the market knows best, which I find the thing that drives me nuts about conservatism, what's called conservatism at this time, which is really classical liberalism. The market knows best. Fuck no. The market is a tool for our society. It's a very useful tool, but it's not the end in itself. And yet liberalism essentially posits that the market is an end to itself, and that the aim is the market. The aim is the market and the state, and the individual divorced from everything and anybody else living in this bastion, and ultimately the state becomes the market in a weird way, because the state is so hell-bent on using the market as a tool for its expansion. That's the thing. We talk about or I at least talk about the Western democracies, but at the end of the day, the Western democracies are really one endless state. That's what they are, with all of these individual...
One holistic system of systems, interwoven, interactive, multinational, multivariate, to quote from Network, which you don't like.
Yeah.
But that speech fundamentally captures it.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree, because we talk about the differences between the EU and the United States and Japan and China, but sure, there are superficial differences, but it's all liberalism. And what's interesting is, how can I put this? We all know that it's not working. We all sense it, feel it, but there aren't any kind of solutions. Because I want to turn the conversation a little bit to his conclusions as to where to go next. Here, I thought that the book sort of floundered, and I don't mean this I just did not feel that Deneen really had any. He gave a great précis of all of the arguments against liberalism, and he organized them in a way that is readily digestible. I think you mentioned, I'm not sure if you mentioned it in the podcast or just before we started the podcast, that the book tended to be repetitive. Absolutely right. The book is repetitive, but I think that it's purposely repetitive so as to pound in the ideas, the central ideas it wants to pound into readers' heads, and pounds them in pretty well. But I think that his conclusions are kind of weak.
Right. And to be fair to any kind of political philosophy like this, I think it's true for most. It's like description is easier than proscription, and I think I've never yet seen a political argument where the proscription really held up. Marx doesn't get prescription right either.
Yeah,
I mean, let's
exactly.
keep things into perspective. And I think on that front, like the best I could say, and I think that's a notion of humanity. It's like theory isn't going to kind of prescribe your way out of this. You kind of just fumble we don't think our way to right action. We act our way to right thinking is the best way to describe it. And I think the answer is like, we're going to bumble through until we figure something out.
Yeah.
And I think in some parts of his conclusion, he acknowledges that. So I give credit to that.
Yeah.
But, he'll say things like, we need to reach a post-ideological worldview. And I said that that's just fundamentally ahuman. Or humans think in ideological terms. I think what he's trying to say is, hey, of the three political ideologies, liberalism, communism, fascism, you would want to be liberated from all three of those. But the reality is that any ordering principle of the world that you have is an ideology.
Yeah,
it could be Christian, it could be Buddhist.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah,
monarchical, hierarchical, it doesn't matter. They're all ideology. There's no way that humans get out of ideology, because there's also no way that humans conceive of the world outside of having stories about how the world operates. And a story is a fucking ideology. That's how it operates.
Yeah, I think that was a bit of a flaw there, because ideologies, ultimately, what are they? Organizing principles of thinking, how to easily manage a whole host of different disparate ideas into one coherent narrative, So I like a post-ideological world, as he's positing, I don't think that that's possible. But anyway, I want to read something here that it was in the conclusion. He says, the noble lie of liberalism is shattering because it continues to be believed and defended by those who benefit from it, while it is increasingly seen as a lie, and not an especially noble one, by the new servant class that liberalism has produced. Now, this is something that I'm really interested in, because there's a chapter of the new aristocracy, which Benway and I, we basically said that we were brought up in that new aristocracy. That is, they're the ones who are putting the pressure to shore up liberalism, and they are the ones who are fighting it the hardest. And I think that the expression of disdain and hatred towards Trump is a realization that Trump, though he himself came from this new aristocracy, both by birth and by his career, he reached the presidency by appealing to those people who were discontent with the liberal paradigm, be it classical liberalism or progressive liberalism, right? And that's why the quote-unquote deep state has such antipathy towards him, because they fear that he is the reaction of the classes that are being stepped on by the liberalist project. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, well, I think so, and let's be clear. I mean, you get this effectively in that chapter. Deneen articulates very well that yes, liberalism has notions of wanting to fight the arbitrariness of heretical aristocracy, but the truth of the matter is it intentionally wants to create its own aristocracy.
Yeah.
Jefferson called it the natural aristocracy. Some would call it a meritocracy. It doesn't really matter. It's still fundamentally, in some big ways, arbitrary. It's still somewhat heretical or hereditary in that, my fucking legacies will probably, go to the same fucking schools that I did. It's just how it works. But the thing is, if you look at those thinkers that are touted as the leaders of liberalism, Jefferson, Dewey, what's his fucking face? John Stuart Mill.
Mm-hmm.
They all acknowledge, it says, especially John Stuart Mill, it says, well, there are just some people who are just really suited to do well in this, and they should be encouraged by all accounts to do whatever they want. And you should treat them a little differently, because that creative ingenuity is just gonna lift us all up. Right. It's kind of like the Reagan supply side economics, in a way, articulated the same thing. Yes, there may be some inequality, but if the top are doing so well, they're going to just spill some shit over, and we're all going to rise as a result of this increasing tide of wealth. The reality of the situation, of which Trump tapped into, whether he intended to or not, is that, hey, look, by you, I mean people in our class, have been doing very well at the expense of others. You've got your free fucking pass. You've been given everything that the system promised you. It's doing well for you. hey, look, there's a lot of people here who aren't getting a good, fair share cut of that, and they're going to try and use whatever power is available to them to take it from you. And then the response to that is, oh, who's taking away my fucking, bread or my little fun benefits? I don't like that. And oh my God, thank God in liberalism we had this notion of protected minority rights in a not a true democracy. We're a republic and we have all these mechanisms to prevent that. You're using all those tools to ensure that you're not troubled by
Right.
this mass uprising. And ordinarily, people would say, even the Greeks would say, yeah, just pure unadulterated democracy. Nobody likes that. It's a perversion of the republic.
Yeah.
But let's also not kid ourselves. It's a tactically useful tool to ensure that the aristocracy that we have now is protected from trouble. In other words, protected from criticism. And the situation now is that the discontents are loud enough and large enough to where the mechanisms you normally have of stopping that are probably going to be insufficient ultimately. And that's why I said, similar to Thomas Kuhn's notion of scientific revolution, political revolution is not that different.
Well, it's what happened before in previous instances where there was critique of the liberal project. Liberalism was able to co-opt those critiques and sort of like incorporate them, adapt to these critiques. But we've reached an end stage where it cannot. And that's why we're getting the repression that we're getting, because Deneen goes on to say the denouement might take one of two forms. That is the end stage of liberalism. He says contemporary liberalism will increasingly resort to imposing the liberal order by fiat, especially in the form of the administrative state run by a small minority who increasingly disdain democracy. If that's not the EU, then I don't know what is. And increasingly the United States too. That's one denouement. And then he says the second possible denouement, the end of liberalism and its replacement by another regime. Most people envisioning such scenarios rightly warn of the likely viciousness of any successor regime, some form of populist, nationalist authoritarianism or military autocracy. Now, he thinks that those are the two end stages of liberalism. It's sort of like a fork in the road, where you have a minority dictating policy and sort of like circumventing democracy or disdaining democracy altogether, or some sort of authoritarian or even military autocracy. I think it's, why not both? Why not one leading seamlessly into the next? A small minority seamlessly moving into military authority. And furthermore, one could argue that we are living in such a society today, whereby any kind of dissent is crushed militarily. Think of Waco. Think of the use of military force on a group of people who just, split from the whole system. That's what Waco really was. And Ruby Ridge, similarly. And you have this minority, the people in the quote-unquote establishment, who basically do as they see fit. They nominally Republicans or Democrats, but they are ultimately going after their own best interest to the detriment of the people. So I'm not so clear as to if it's a fork in the road, but rather just a descent into military authoritarianism, with the patina, with the illusion of some sort of self-rule that really isn't effective. See what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, that's certainly possible, but it's also there's just I don't like being in that kind of predictive game too much, because I just think there's too many roads to take. Yeah. For example, the Soviet Union near the end, there was a military coup against Gorbachev to control it. It lasted all of a few days and it collapsed utterly.
It was a day. Yeah.
Like it couldn't even, like you said, it could barely last a day. That's certainly possible. I think the degree to which liberalism is in trouble is the degree to which you had said earlier, is to what degree can it absorb the critique and live through it. I think the greatest sign that Marxism will never survive the critique is very clear to me. They're Che Guevara t-shirts. Che Guevara t-shirts to me says you can fucking make money off of the symbols of their critique. Marxism is nowhere to go. No. It's not coming back. Don't pretend otherwise. The degree to which I'm interested now is whether or not the anti-globalist sentiment is going to be fully absorbed in t-shirt money. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
Because if it becomes a commodity that can be bought and sold, and it's just like, oh, it's like a spectator support. You're going through the motions.
Yeah.
That will be the case. Which is why when I see, your Milos of the world, do that fucking T-shirt off of any kind of meme that comes out of this shit, I'm like, you fucking idiot. You know what you kind of basically represent. You're representing the degree to which the critique gets absorbed into the mercantile system.
Yeah.
So I think most folks on our side probably don't want to see the market ended per se. I don't think that they're communists by any stretch of the term, but at the same time, I would caution them to just assume that you don't want just free, unabated market powers going about, because then you just fall back into the trap of what Deneen has been articulating in this book, which is the state and the market work in Congress with one another to reinforce the liberal position. So we'll see. The best I could say is we'll see. And I still maintain the way out of it, if there is a way out of it, is we're going to fumble our way through until we find something.
Yeah, more likely than not, because that's traditionally been the path of human beings. Okay, there's rarely, if ever, a clean break. It's always just a slow stumbling forward kind of situation. He says something very interesting in his conclusions. He talks about. Let me read it specifically. He says three things, and I'll reverse the order that he puts them in. He says that. Oops, where'd it go? Here it is. Deneen basically says that there are three steps that he thinks are going to happen after liberalism. And the first one he says is the achievements of liberalism must be acknowledged, and the desire to return to a pre-liberal age must be eschewed. The second is that we must outgrow the age of ideology. And the third is, from the cauldron of such experience and practice, a better theory of politics and society might ultimately emerge. Now, of these 3 points, like we said before, we dismissed the notion of outgrowing the age of ideology. Ideology is not an age; it's the way human beings are, and the notion of trying to come up with a better theory of politics and society. Yeah, sure. I hope that we figure out a way to run cars on a cup of water every day. But that's a pipe dream. But the first point that he makes is, I think, the best one, frankly, is the issue that we have to acknowledge what liberalism has achieved and not try to return to a pre-liberal ideal, which does not exist. And I think that we, on the political right, tend to fall into the trap of wishing to go back to a pastoral past, something that was wonderful and didn't have any of the problems of today. It had problems of its own. But we ignore those problems of its own and rather just focus on the fact that the past lacked the problems that we're currently confronted in. I fully agree with Deneen on that score, that we cannot go to the past. We have to, say liberalism was great, and it was great. It has been great. It has achieved enormous material benefits.
I'm gonna disagree with you on this one. I actually think of the 3 points, it's the third point that I think is the only one of value, which is, I think the third point is just really, all he's really saying there is that we're going to fumble our way through it. That's where to say the actual practice of engaging in an actual community will achieve the theory you have from. I think the first one is just too much fucking concession to a progressive notion of history, which is, you're always going to be advancing to something else. Right, you're always building on that, the other. Yes, of course, you could say, yeah, it has principles of Edmund Burke baked into it, of you're always building on things. But the truth of the matter is, you can easily go back to an older time. For example, you can easily say, we're gonna have an authoritarian monarchy. You can do that. Whether it's successful or not is kind of TBD. Everything is sort of TBD. I just fail to get ooh and ahhed over the notion like, you can never go back home again. Well, that's just somewhat tautological. Of course, you can't go home again, but that doesn't mean you can't look to past forms of structure as means of building on things. And yeah, I can look at something that's pre-liberal and say, yeah, there's probably something of use.
Okay.
To thinking about.
Okay. Then taking you at your word, what do you think would be a good replacement for liberalism? What do you envision that would replace liberalism?
I think elements of Roman republicanism can certainly do that, and I'm not gonna. I refuse to. I'm sorry. I just don't like to play this game of like, oh well, give me your example.
Okay.
It's like, well, the reality of the matter is, you learn from bits and pieces and you kind of build off of it. But this notion that like, oh, we don't ever think about mentioning monarchy again. Don't ever think about mentioning oligarchic or almost like the republics of Italy where you had elite groups of folks building off of their their feudalistic structures and obligations to the people. That just to me is it's telling you to reject thought. It's like, well, because you can't go back to the old reproduce the old past. You can't look to that old past for anything. You got to find new answers. I'm like,
Okay.
sorry, you're not that creative.
Well,
I mean, the reality is, you're not going to build something new.
Yeah, but my own thinking is actually black-pilled. I think that we're going to go into some sort of authoritarianism backed by military force. That seems the reasonable direction that we're going. And it'll be gussied up in like nice language, acceptable language. But I think that that's where we're ultimately heading. And also I think that, how can I put this? I think that the central, if the people are given enough, how can I put it, enough bread and enough circus to sort of like distract them from the current problems, I think liberalism might last a lot longer. And I think that the elites have to sit down real hard and figure out a way that can keep the populace happy for longer. And that would buy a lot more time. I'm talking a century or two for liberalism to continue. I think that it's been a failure of the elites to understand the problem and thereby come up with a solution that that might be patchwork. It doesn't really matter, but that will give liberalism a second wind. I don't know what that solution would be. I would argue that sort of like trying to roll back on the debt enslavement of the people, that would be a big one, because I think that the elites are not acknowledging how debt can weigh on people's spirit so catastrophically. Not unemployment, not any of those things. Debt, because that notion that you owe is a heavy burden. I've been in debt very few times in my life, but the times that I have been in debt, I've been miserable. I hated it because I felt that all of my work was to pay somebody else, and it just made me miserable. I think that would be a central solution to pacify the people. Because I think that the liberal elites are perfectly aware of what's going on. They might not be able to articulate it, but they recognize that their position is becoming more and more untenable. That's why they are resorting more and more to authoritarian means of silencing any kind of critique or opposition. A self-confident people, a self-confident elite would not bother to have silenced Andrew Anglin or Alex Jones. They would have just ignored them. Because they would have said, oh, look how funny. I mean, think about it. In the Skokie, Illinois case, right, where the KKK wanted to march through Skokie, Illinois.
It was the Nazis.
Or the Nazis, yeah. Sorry. Nobody cared. Nobody cared because it was thinking, well, we're robust enough as a society that we can allow this nonsense. Today, that would never be allowed. It would never be allowed, right? Well, we saw it. We saw it with Charlottesville, right? There's a lack of self-confidence. And I think that the lack of self-confidence of the elites comes from the knowledge that the great mass of people, the bottom 80%, are feeling more and more that they're drowning. And I think that if the elites realize that they have to throw more bread and circus at the bottom 80%, they can last another century. Do you see what I'm saying?
I mean, it's certainly possible. I mean, if they get around the needs question, then they could probably deal with it. But it seems to me that there's enough psychological anxiety above and beyond the achievement of material wants. I mean, like I said, if you could deliver bread to everybody and you could deliver soma, what have you, yeah, that'll last. But I think we've reached a point where the crisis is spiritual in a big way that can't be resolved. I know people say, "Oh, that's just empty gesture," but like when you're talking about you being as a white man unable to participate in the society because your historical sins preclude you from it,
Yeah.
or you have to accept transgendered mutilation of children and all of these other aspects of living in a progressive society. They weigh on you heavily to the point where you don't really satiate that with bread and circuses. You only deal with it by moving away from that kind of thinking. But the way that we're in the liberal ideology that we have now kind of will deny that, the ability to kind of resolve those issues. And I think you can't discount this notion of feeling disassociated with the society as a whole
Mm.
on that level. And so I don't know that the bread and circuses problem will resolve that. The only thing I can think of as a way of getting out of this somewhat peaceably, and I can't even guarantee that, is if people start, like Deneen sort of suggested in that third point, is like, look, you don't know the right ideological path out of this, but if you start fumbling your way through by actively participating in whatever local community you have and just forcing yourself to deal with it, you'll figure something out eventually. It's just, fake it until you make it kind of thing. We don't even do that now. I mean, like, he joked about participation rates in the national election being in the 50 or 60%, but just wait till you see what the participation rates are like in the local elections. They're not pretty.
Yeah.
And it's above and beyond the local elections. I mean, it's just showing up at your school board meeting, going to your local library board, going to the town hall meeting and say, oh, what are we discussing today? Oh, we got to fix that or the other. That act of being present in your community and building those relations is, frankly, the foundation of a lot of the bits that, as Deneen pointed out, de Tocqueville said, look, if anything is going to work in this American republic, it's the degree of active participation in these communities, which liberalism fundamentally has tried to destroy.
Mm.
And if you don't operate in those and you disassociate yourself from that political participation, you are guaranteeing a fast road to despotism. I mean, de Tocqueville literally said something to that effect. And so if that is the path we're on now, and if you say, well, look, let's kind of do like meet 50-50, we'll, within the bounds of the liberal order, we'll try to still act like we're fucking participants in a community. Maybe that helps you out in some way. I can't guarantee it. I don't know that for certain, but it's certainly something that I think it'd be worth trying at any given point in time. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about something completely different, by the way. The notion that he identifies Machiavelli as the originator of liberalism, I found fascinating because I never considered it in that sense. But looking at it like that, it's obvious. I know this is a trivial issue, and we've gone over an hour, and it seems like a very trivial issue, but for me, what I liked about the book was how neatly he laid out all of these different philosophical ideas and contributions, philosophers who contributed to basic ideas of liberalism and how it culminated in liberalism. It didn't come out of nothing. And I think that that's what I liked very much about the book, because I think that this is a great book for first-year philosophy students, because I'm thinking of my own experiences as a philosophy student. That's what I majored in college. And, I sort of like had to piece together how, different thinkers came about. I had the class on continental thinkers and what have you, but it was sort of like piecing it together, whereas this book very neatly marches everybody along and explains how they all fit into this liberal project. And I found it, how can I put this?
Well,
I found it terrific in that sense. And that's why I liked it so much. And that's why I'm proselytizing it so much, because I think that for anybody who's, fairly bright and educated, but not necessarily knowledgeable about any of these philosophers, you pick up this book and you'll understand the importance of Machiavelli, of Hobbes, of Locke, or Loki, as we call him in our neck of the woods, and you'll understand how it all fits together in a way that I found just very refreshing. Okay.
Well, I'll tell you why you found it refreshing, because in the act of doing that, he takes a very anti-liberal position, because what he's doing is are demonstrating the culture that built liberalism and acknowledging that there is such a thing as culture, there is such a thing as past things that are built upon to create liberalism,
Yeah.
that which liberalism itself refuses to acknowledge was the case.
Exactly. Exactly right. And there's also the sense that, well, yeah, as you said, exactly right. I'll just be repeating what you said, which is that, yeah, he's not a cheerleader for liberalism. And yeah, I'm well, you say that he had said in some interview that he was a Marxist, or at least was had a passing fancy with Marxism in his day. So yeah, that view of not buying your own ideology, yeah. And I think also that for a lot of people, this book is going to be very important because they're going to realize for the first time that they are living under an ideology. Because I think that one of the great powers of liberalism is convincing everybody that this is the way things ought to be. I think that that's a remarkable achievement because communism did not have that. There was a sense that we are striving towards the socialist state. Okay, it was self-conscious, whereas liberalism is sotto voce. It's just under the radar. It's an ideology that convinces by example, convinces by subtle cues to guide you along, but it doesn't hit you over the head with it as itself as an ideology, which I thought was
In
just
fact, it tries to profess itself as non-ideological. So
yeah,
I'm just stating what things are, man. It's like, what is the greatest trick the devil ever played is to convince the world he didn't exist.
exactly, exactly, and that goes back to the Machiavellian notion that people are bad, okay, and yeah, you don't realize it that Machiavelli was the inflection point because before that we were always striving to be better. I was reading. I mentioned in a previous podcast. I forget which one. That I'd read this book on medieval history that talked about that it was basically the accounts of witnesses during an inquisition in a French village, Montagnel or something like that. I forget the name of it. It's not important. The point is, see, I remember reading that book, which was an account of this French medieval village and all the goings on, high and low, and like gossip going on, and this person having sex with this other person, and blah blah blah, right? All this trivial stuff, but of life, right? And it was hard to understand from my perspective a lot of the motivations and the things that they were doing. A lot of things didn't make any sense to me because when I read it, I was in college at the time that I read it, and I was a liberalist, if you want to call it that. I was firmly in the grips of liberalism. I didn't even realize it. And had I been a socialist living in communist Russia, I would have been able to understand this book of medieval history a lot better because I would have read it through the self-conscious lens that I am living in an ideology that has disparate values from this past vision of how life should be. Whereas when I read it in the West, in my college up in New Hampshire, I viewed it as I'm living the way things ought to be, so why are these people acting in such bizarre ways? And I think that that's the thing, the takeaway, because as I become more self-conscious, I'm 50 years old, and only recently have I started to become much more self-conscious about the fact that I live under liberalism. It's making me rethink and relook at a whole host of things that before I'd sort of like not understood because they seemed alien to me, but I just said, well, it must have been like that, and that's that. But now, as I realize that I am and have been living under an ideology, I'm looking back at things and saying, oh, now I get it in a way that would not be possible, was not possible for me before because of my indoctrination. What?
Yeah, you were just trained to think that way. That was the natural order.
Indoctrinated.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, was the book you were referencing called The Devils of Loudon?
No. It's I actually have it here on my Amazon orders. Let me just look it up real quick. But it was this great book that I read in back in college in this medieval European history class. And where to go? Oh, here. Montaillou, Cathars and Catholics in a French Village, 1294-1324, by Emmanuel Leroy Ladurie. Ladurie is spelled Ladurie. Let me repeat that. Montaillou. I'll leave the link, an affiliated link to Amazon down below. Montaillou, Cathars and Catholics in a French Village. It was a textbook in this medieval European history class that I took that was really terrific, and it's the account of this bishop who eventually became pope, who was very autistic about his record keeping, and so it was an inquisition, and he was there to stamp out some heresy or other, and he was in this town called Montaillou, and he was there, and he took the testimony of a whole bunch of people who were involved in this heresy that he was there to stamp out, and he took very detailed notes. And he had scribes write down the testimony of everybody. And they talked about all sorts of things, both ecclesiastic and profane, just the trivia of life. And it's really fascinating because of that, because these records are so detailed and these testimonies are so detailed and in the actual voice of the people. It wasn't so much that the scribes were like rewriting what was said. They took down the actual words of the people of, 700 years ago. And it's fascinating. It's truly an interesting book. And like I said, I read it and it was just bizarre. It was like Martians. But because at that time I was living under the throes of liberalism, I didn't understand the ideology I was living under. Like I said, it's only been in these last few years that I've had more time to think about these things, that I haven't been wrapped up in the pressures of daily life and earning a living and so forth, that I've had the luxury to think about these issues. And I think that's the thing, that's the other aspect of liberalism, that it keeps you running on a treadmill. You're constantly trying to earn money. I mentioned before on this podcast how when I was living in London, everybody I met was so busy trying to earn a living that they really didn't have much time for friendships, for just passing time together. They were just constantly trying to make money, and all of the relationships that they had were either, can this person make me money or help me make money? Yes, great, I'll hang out with them, I'll socialize with them. No, then next. That was the mentality in London. And I'm realizing that's the mentality of liberalism, that it keeps you running on an endless treadmill. And so that endless treadmill prevents you from looking up and asking the bigger questions. You see what I'm saying? It's only now, as an older man with more time on my hands, that I'm able to think about these things.
Well, I certainly long for the day when future generations can look back on this period of time and say, wow, they must have been aliens from a different world with their things that I cannot understand why they would ever think that way.
Oh, most certainly. That will most certainly happen. That will most certainly happen. That always happens. That's the way things should be. And every human social organization ultimately decays. That's the nature of human beings. But I'm kind of curious to see how this is going to happen, because we human beings look at the past as discrete periods of time, like the Roman Empire, then the Dark Ages, we call them, then the Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, and then the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and blah, blah. But see, to the people living there, they weren't discrete periods of time. There wasn't like a bright line where one day, on the calendar it said, oh, it's no longer the High Middle Ages, it's now properly the Renaissance. They didn't think that way. It was just like you said. It was just a stumbling forward.
Because the man who ultimately had the best thought on that matter was Hegel, and Hegel's point was, it was the Owls of Minerva speech, which was that only after the owls take their flight do we realize the end of the era, which was to say that it's only in the aftermath of the era, when you look back on it in a disassociated way, can you say this was a period of time and that was a period of time.
Yeah, exactly. And so we are living in a period of time that later people will, it'll happen long after we're gone, I'm sure. Later people will say that this was a critical time. Whether this critical time will signal a resurgence of liberalism and its continuation, or if it's a critical time that is signaling its decay and ultimate collapse, well, that remains to be seen. but it's certainly every period of time thinks that it's living a critical time. Okay, I think that that's a natural state of affairs because we're always thinking solipsistically, and we're also always thinking that us and now is the most important thing ever, which is of course a lie. But I do believe that this period of time really is much more important, and we sense it. Or am I giving too much? Am I reading too much into it? You tell me.
Well, it always is convenient how it's our time that we always think is the most important. I suspect, we're feeling at the very least, the beginning phrase of a system which doesn't seem to be holding its own. I can't ultimately decide one way or the other. We're too intimately involved.
Here's the reason I'm saying this is because I remember the 90s, for example. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, when it was clear that what was left of the Eastern Bloc was just a mess, there was a real sense that these times don't really matter. Okay? There was a real collective sense that this is just free years, a freebie time. And that's why I think that the 9/11 was such a shock. Okay? Because I'm telling you, between the collapse of the Soviet Union in 91 and 2001 and 9/11, there was this sense that we're just simply, it was just like everything is going up and up and up, and there's no real problems. And there were minor dips in the stock market and minor this and that, but it was not like a time of plenty. It wasn't a sense of boundless optimism like the 50s. It was more a sense of this is a parenthetical time that means nothing.
It was boredom. You basically, and Deneen said it, the Fukuyama notion of the end of history was such okay, well, I guess we solved things. Now what? I guess this is it. That was the tone of a lot of Generation X, which was, I don't give a shit. Oh, well, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah.
The best album, right? Nevermind really kind of captured it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I really like the book. I think that we've tried the patience of our listeners quite a bit. We've gone on an hour and 20. But it was a fascinating book. Highly recommend it. And I think that there's nothing really to critique about the book in the sense of getting anything wrong. I think, Benway, you'd agree with that assessment?
Pretty much, yeah. I think that's fair.
Yeah. So on that note, we're going to call it an end to the podcast. So this has been the Coach and Benway podcast. I hope that you have enjoyed it, and we will see you soon.
Just read the book. There's nothing more sophisticated than that.
Yeah, read the book.